Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Screen Society podcast, a podcast where we cover all things TV, movies, and anything you can get on your screen. My name is Logan, and we are here today talking about Shrinking Season 3, Episode 4, called The Field. That episode aired on February 18th, 2026. The IMDb synopsis is Gabby invites Jimmy to speak to her class. When Derek ends up in the hospital, Liz has issues with their son and Paul has an important realization. And we had quite an episode. It was 8.1 rated on IMDb. And I thought a pretty solid episode. If I had to get a ranking, I think I would go with probably an 8 as well. I thought that we got some realizations about some characters that we hadn't quite gotten before. We had some interesting developments with Jimmy that I thought were really important that the show covered extremely well. And we see a side of him that we had not really seen yet. And I thought it was really interesting that we started the episode with that. We get the return of a special guest star. Michael J. Fox returns in this episode as well. And there's a lot of things to kind of digest. It's a little bit of a deeper episode. Not as, I would say, exciting as some of the other episodes, but definitely gave us a lot of good stuff over the 37 minutes or so that it aired. And so let's jump right into what happens in the episode. We start out with Jimmy talking to Kimmy, and they're talking about being on a date once again. Jimmy has decided that maybe it's time and best to move on from the advice of Liz and his friends. And we get him on a date, I think, for really the first time. And we have him sort of interested in Sophie, and they kind of go on that little 15-minute I would say more of a meet and greet kind of thing where they really start to get to know one another, but it's very short and long lived. And now Jimmy is on a date with Kimmy, who was the nurse that was helping deliver Brian and Charlie's kid in the last episode. I like Kimmy. I think that she's great. She obviously really likes Jimmy. They're talking about first date ordering, and he's like, I don't ever order anything too spicy. But if you have dynamite shrimp on there, of course I'm gonna do the dynamite. But like, it's a little spicy, and shrimp can be pretty classy. And she's talking about the wines that she drinks, and she tries not to get too crazy on first dates. And then Jimmy starts to talk a little bit about how it's been pretty long now that he's moved on, or that he's starting to move on. It's been a pretty long time since he's been able to do that. And then Kimmy drops the line of like, doesn't it feel like you're cheating on her? And he goes, well, it does now. It's such an interesting dynamic, I think, as I'm not somebody luckily that's in this position. And there's a lot of people that don't really ever get into this position. But unfortunately, this is a very real topic, I think, and something that I don't know if you're not in this situation, you really think too much about. But when you have someone that is a loved one, or even in this case, a spouse, when they do die, moving on is very difficult. And I can only imagine when it's talking about a love interest, whether that be a wife, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, whatever it might be, a husband, it's got to be so extremely difficult to try to separate yourself from that relationship, because obviously that can no longer go on. And so you're trying to pick up all the pieces and all the grief, and it's taken about 3 seasons for him to do so. And with Tia's death, Jimmy is obviously not done extremely well, as one would normally do. They would struggle with someone passing that they were in love with. So he's trying to navigate his relationships and other relationships that can be very difficult when you're dealing with grief and trauma, as Jimmy is. And so now that we seem to have really gotten to a point where Jimmy and Alice have started to move on from, and again, this is a really hard thing to do, because while you do want to move on, you don't want to forget. You want to always honor that person in death. And I think that can be extremely difficult when they're not around, obviously. And Jimmy is just trying to do right by what he thinks Tia would think. And I think for so many, it's the realization of they would likely want you to move on. And obviously that is a conversation you can't have. But I think for so many, it's important to realize that that moving on doesn't really necessarily mean you're replacing someone. It just means that you are trying to fill the void of somebody that really truly cares for you romantically, physically, whatever it might be. And that can be a challenge because you have so many emotions tied to the person that you no longer will ever see again. And it's, I think, so much different, obviously, than a breakup because you can have emotions attached and you know that that person still is somebody that you could eventually end up with again, or maybe paths cross again. But when somebody is lost because of death, I think that it just becomes even more challenging to be okay with moving forward in life. And I think that's really what Jimmy's struggling with. And this is the first time you really see somebody other than, I would say, Gabby and Liz, and then obviously Alice and Jimmy, really get affected by the emotions and trauma of being connected to someone that has gone through a tremendous amount of loss. And so she really empathizes, and she is somebody that does empathize with Jimmy because she starts to break up like emotionally during this dinner date because she feels bad for Alice not having a mother. She feels bad for Jimmy losing his wife. And this person is an empath, and she obviously didn't know Tia and she barely knows Jimmy, but she can feel those feelings because she, I imagine, is thinking about what it would be like for her to go through that kind of loss. And Jimmy's shocked by this. And they kind of play it to a comedic relief kind of thing, but I think this is a very real feeling for some people. I can't imagine dating somebody that was a widow, but they start to talk about their family. And one of my favorite lines, I think Kimmy's talking about her family or her mother. And she goes, yeah, she's from Chicago, or we're from Chicago. And he goes, duh, Bears. Like he's just trying to lighten the mood. But she is basically living in all of this trauma that Jimmy has been involved with over the last couple of years. He later on to the next scene, he's sitting with Paul because he finally gets to go to the doctor with Paul to listen to just what's going on, the progress that Paul's making, or what's happening with Paul's situation with Parkinson's. And he said there, he goes, yeah, I mean, the whole night she just basically was upset. And then he goes, she cried so hard that she threw up. And you can just see it in Jimmy's face back in the dinner date that he's just like, what is happening? But again, it's played to be comedic, but I do think that it would be, I mean, obviously I don't think everybody would like break down and cry, but the other person on the other side of that table who is now interested in somebody that is a widow, I do think that there would be this empathetic, and maybe they do get emotional a little bit because humans are humans, right? I mean, I think you would put yourself in that situation, even if you're obviously single, or you're just starting to date this person. You would say, well, what if I lost a really important person in my life like that? And how would I feel? And I think you can get wrapped up in those emotions, starting to think about it, make yourself upset, even though the person across from you is the one going through that trauma. So many people are empaths, and I think that's what's really played well here. But Paul and Jimmy are basically talking in the next scene in the doctor's office in the waiting room that Paul's proud of Jimmy. Jimmy's, again, really struggled to move on. I think that he moves on with, and I think I've seen this quite a bit online. It's like, why didn't he just, reach out to Sophie? I really do think that he's got serious feelings towards Sophie. I think Kimmy was more of, I just want to get back out there and go on a date and see what is, see if I remember how to do this. And I think that is how she is played in the show. And I think with obviously how it goes, I don't think they're meant to be, but I do think it was an important step in the healing process for Jimmy. And I think that it's going to propel his character forward now because he's able to realize, and obviously he's going to keep going through these different spells of, once he starts to really fall for someone, he'll probably have these moments of what it feels like of a betrayal because of Tia. And so I think that we are obviously not out of the clear there. I think that there's still a lot of trauma around that. But Jimmy takes Paul to see the doctor. It's like his turn in the rotation to go with Paul, and they call him back, and we get another scene right in between when they call him back, and he goes and gets them to visit with the doctor, of the fact of Alice holding Charlie and Brian's child. And when they are holding the child, whose name is Sutton, which is wild because my niece's name is Sutton. But Alice is holding Sutton. They're talking about how it's going, how the new family is going, and Charlie and Brian are like, it's difficult, but obviously uh, we've got to set some boundaries. And Liz, I don't want the baby thinking that Liz is the mother because she's so controlling of what's going on in kind of a helicopter. And Liz has been a true help, but obviously Brian and Charlie aren't really having to deal with the fact of like giving birth, so they are they are both able to help new fathers. And Liz has done this obviously, so Liz is trying to coach them on how to best do this, changing diapers, whatever it might be. Liz is like, you know what? I'll leave you guys alone, but first I want to give you Matthew's old stuffed animal, and it's a little bunny. And obviously, this is a play on reading those newborn books on how to become how you navigate becoming a new parent. And she goes to put the bunny in the crib, and Brian's like, don't put it in there, it'll suffocate, it's gonna fall on them and they're gonna die. And it is just I think it's the way that new parents think that everything will kill the child, when obviously, I mean, I'm sure that there's been a whole lot worse things have happened in a crib like that. And but it's, yeah, I think you hype yourself up. You've got this newborn human life in your hands that really doesn't have control over anything of what's going on right now, and isn't cognitive enough to know what's going on. So you've got to do everything in your power to nurture and protect this infant. And uh, Brian is clearly freaked out. But then Liz goes and puts the bunny on the shelf, and then we get another scene with Gabby talking to a reoccurring patient. I'm trying to figure out what this patient is. I think it's her name is Maya, and it's she's constantly presenting. I don't exactly know what they're talking about. I think she's talking about like going out and drinking with friends or something like that. And there's cute guys, and she's flirting and just talking through her normal life. And it this character is used to show that Gabby is still not finding fulfillment in her job, and she makes jokes about certain things. Maya gets up and she's upset, and so she walks out, and Gabby's just like, I'm not finding any kind of fulfillment in my job right now. And that can be very difficult. You go through these ruts, I think, when you're working, where you're just like, I'm not finding value in what I'm doing, don't seem appreciated, don't really feel like I'm making a difference. And so she gets a call. Jimmy and them are talking. Jimmy's still in the waiting room with Paul, or the doctor's office with Paul, and Gabby's talking to her. And Dr. Patel was supposed to cover. Gabby's teaching at a college, and she's got to step in because Dr. Patel's not going to be there to teach a class. And Gabby's talking about like Maya is breaking my will to want to do this, and Jimmy's like, Gabby's like, hey, would you have any interest in coming in and talking? And Paul, like Jimmy's interested, but then he and Paul have to go because the doctor does come in to talk to them about the appointment and what's going on. And Jimmy's like, hey, like we got to go because the doctor's coming in, and I'm, his appointment buddy. And then it's funny because Paul's like, my appointment buddy, who establishes that nickname? Like, who do you think you are? Like, this is so childish, as Paul would normally do. But then we get the doctor coming in and informing Paul and Jimmy that the hallucinations and the UTI were kind of solved by antibiotics, and that she said that sometimes she notices with patients with Parkinson's that they struggle emotionally. And she goes, I think it would be helpful to talk through all the things that are going on. And, you know, but she says, I think you're okay to get back to a normal way of life right now. And he said, so perfect, I can go back to work. And now this is going to set up throughout the episode Paul really contemplating what life looks like going forward, because obviously he's an older guy. I think Harrison's above 80. I think he plays 70 something in this show. But you can tell that he starts to, throughout the episode, he starts to reconsider whether he wants to go back to life as it was. And he enjoyed the slow life of basically retirement. I mean, obviously he had Parkinson's, he's trying to deal with all that, but it's like, I'm around for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We have our morning walks with Julie. Like, this is a really great way to just kind of go out of what I've been doing my whole life. And he, being the boss and being the person that owns that office, the therapist office, like I feel like he is really feeling what we all felt during COVID when we had to go back to work after we'd all been kind of just lounging around, hanging out. I think you felt the kind of same thing. I was a teacher, and I would say after summers when you would have to go back to school, it was like, this is brutal. I don't want to go back to school. Like I like really enjoyed just hanging out, not doing anything, not working. I think everybody would choose retirement if they could tomorrow, but that's not always the case. But in this case, Paul can, and you start to see him have this internal battle of like, do I stay and do what I love and have always loved? And then I think you also have people, and I'm not like this, so I don't really get it, but there are some people like this where um, they would be lost without their work, and it keeps them busy and occupied, where I can occupy myself so easily. So I'm not somebody that can really understand this feeling, but I know there are some people that would be very lost. So without their jobs, and that's not saying anything negative. That's just saying that there are some people that would get bored and can't really occupy themselves. But we go into the office. Jimmy's talking to one of his patients, but he goes back into the break room, and Gabby's there. And he's just like, I think they're trying to just break Gabby out of this rut. And I do think that Gabby is very rule following. She's just not kind of willing to break that mold. She's not really willing to risk things or try things. And I think they're trying to get her through this together. My favorite part of this episode is Paul walks in and he does the Indiana Jones like theme song and he says the goat has arrived. It was so cool because it's again breaking that fourth wall. I thought it was a lovely touch. But then Gabby and Jimmy are heading off because they're going to go talk to Gabby's class that she has to cover because Dr. Patel's not going to be able to be there to cover it. So they have to go. And again, I really do think that Paul is trying to talk to them about how he's feeling and that he's not really feeling like he should be back at work, and that he's really starting to kind of think about what this retirement would look like. And so I think that's where ultimately this is heading is as we get further and further into the season, him really struggling with the fact that maybe he just doesn't want to do what he does anymore. We get another scene with Charlie and Brian, and you can hear Liz talking about doing the bicycle legs to work out the gas from Sutton because she's upset. And they're like, "Good job farting," and then they go over and they're like, "Thank you so much." But this is creepy that you got a camera. You put this camera in this bunny so you could spy on us and try to parent from a distance, and it is highly disturbing. But again, very Liz, very controlling. And then we get Marisol back in to the episode as Derek lets Marisol in with Sean, and they're talking about the toilet. There's like a magical toilet, I guess, that Liz and Derek have, and he's talking about that. And we get this really cool moment because Sean's been living in the pool house of like, oh, you brought the girl home. Basically, like Liz and Derek have almost adopted this guy as their own. And she's talking about this godly toilet that they have. I'm assuming it's got a bidet in it, and that's what's so magical about it. But Derek's like, you and your butt will not be disappointed. And I continue to love Derek. I think he's probably my favorite character in the whole show. I mean, these are all really good characters, but he is so good at what he does. And I think it's Ted McGinley because I've actually, it's funny. I've been watching Scrubs and I think who's the other McGinley? Dang, I'm blanking on his first name. John C. McGinley, who is Dr. Cox. And he obviously has worked a lot with Bill Lawrence because he works with Scrubs. And there's another show that he's doing with Steve Carell. So like they got both McGinleys. They're not related. I had to look that up because I thought maybe they were related. But yeah, I love Ted so much, McGinley in this. And they continue to talk about their son, Matthew, and their other boy. I forget the other kid's name, but like, Matthew is continuing to struggle. He's still not able to get up on his feet. He doesn't have a job. He's really, really not doing well, and they're trying to figure out what to do, what the best do to him since last episode or last couple episodes when they really tried to cut ties and get him off the couch and get out of the house. Because I think he's like 23 or 24, and he's got to start a life, and he can't keep depending on his parents. But then we go to Gabby teaching her lecture, and there's a student comes in, and like the student had been over to Gabby's house, and he's like, "Wait to set boundaries for the boundaries, girly. You basically just open the house to any of your students that that you allow." I really do. I think Gabby is at a really weird crossroads in life where she's second guessing everything, and she's not really finding value in a lot of the different things that she's doing. So I I do think that Jimmy's trying to help her along because I do think that she's still struggling with some of the trauma from Tia's death, and that she's also dealing with different things in her life that are not quite as stable as she would like for them to be. And I think that can be very difficult for someone at her age. And once you start to reach, I think they're all in their 40s, I would guess. Once you reach that point in life, I do feel like you get into like that midlife crisis or that moment in life where you're just kind of bored and you're trying to find ways to keep it lively and try to keep life interesting. And I think that's what she's struggling with. But they start talking about techniques. They have good moments with different students, and a lot of comedic things happen in the class, but it wasn't really too much to get into there. But again, Gabby's just trying to break ground somewhere, and she's really having a difficult time. Liz and Derek's son Matthew, and we'll kind of break away from the scene for scene here. But Liz and Derek's child, they had they go over to assist. Well, Derek goes over to assist his son Matthew, and Liz and Derek are sitting there, and Derek's like, "Ooh, look, gummies." He's like, "I got low blood sugar. I need to eat some of the gummies." And there's a moment where I think it happens off screen. You don't see it, but Derek's downstairs and he starts to eat the gummies. And then we later learn that the gummies were wheat gummies, and so he is as high as a kite, and he will have to go to the emergency room because of how high Derek gets. But yeah, in the class, in the little classroom, in the classroom lecture, there's just not a lot going. Like there, I think Jimmy and the reason why it's in the episode is they're trying to figure out, and Jimmy brings his patients in the classroom that he was seeing, but there's a discussion of people breaking down things that make them uncomfortable or breaking down barriers and moving past certain things. I think that's ultimately why this because it was part of the episode. I was like, okay, it's good, but it didn't really push the story too much. Like it does help in the fact that like they're able to both kind of admit that they're working through things, and Gabby is trying to help her students, and I just feel like it's just not. I don't know. It was just not an interesting part for me. Like I kind of felt clunky in this episode, but it was okay. Like it did its thing. Derek, again, kind of wrapping out the Derek storyline. Like he gets high, he's walking down the street, and there's a moment where he sees a mannequin, and he's like, "Buddy, there's no way to say this, but your dick is missing." Because and then the lady from the shop comes out and goes, "Sir, are you okay?" And she's like, "You want to call you an ambulance?" He goes, "I've been poisoned, so yes, you might want to call me an ambulance. I'm just a little bit dying." It was so good. Obviously, they call an ambulance, and he goes and hugs the mannequin. He gets put in the ambulance, but then he starts calling everybody. It's hilarious. I think he calls a brother at one point, calls Liz, calls Jimmy. They hear that he's going to the hospital, so obviously they're all going to convene at the hospital and have that discussion. But then we get a moment with, and this is the moment I wanted to get to with Paul. We get Sean talking to Paul, and Paul, he's trying to therapy him, and I think Sean kind of role reversals here, and he's asking Paul questions, and um, I think in this moment he starts to realize a little bit that maybe maybe he loved the life that he was living not working. And I think that Sean's pretty good at kind of using his life instances to bounce back on Paul, and Paul starts to have these discussions with himself of like, I think it's a lot of self realization through different things that Sean has said. And I think it's a great working relationship. Like, I think obviously Paul's giving him all of the uh, advice about Marisol and how to deal with his relationships. But I think in that bouncing off of one another, I think it allows Paul to think through some of the things that he's going through and some of the obstacles that he has. So again, I think it's a great relationship. I love that relationship. But then we see our return of Jerry, and Jerry is played by Michael J. Fox, and this time they see Jerry. So uh, a fellow Parkinson patient. Last time Paul saw him was a hallucination. This time it's real. Paul introduced the metaphor of the field, encouraging Gary to explore it emotionally. The exercise does very little for Gary, but it unlocks clarity for Paul. So again, like I said, he does this with Sean. He does this with Jimmy. Paul's very good at working through his own problems through even advice for others. And so he goes in, he goes to meet with Jerry, and Jerry is, they're trying an exercise where they're working on what Jerry can do to move on. Different vocal exercises, different exercises that one would normally do with Parkinson's, but also talking about the fact that, like, having to move on and accept other things. But as they're talking, he's talking about, you know, what Paul calls it the field. And what that is he's like, close your eyes. It's an exercise that he says, envision a mysterious cloud of intelligence and energy. Um, I'm reading it off the screen now, but he's like, oh, it sounds kind of dumb. He's like, it's not dumb. He says, a little dumb. He's like, all right, it's a little dumb. But anyway, envision, close your eyes. I want you to walk into the warm energy and let it wash over you. And say, I want the answer I know you have. And then be still and listen to what that energy would be. He goes, I'm doing it. He said, are you doing it? And he says, okay, I will. So then Paul does it as well. And this is the moment where he goes, he starts to he sees his daughter, sees his wife, and the realizations are there, right? Of, it's grateful to be able to focus on yourself. It's grateful to take the time that you need to connect with your wife. And it's all of his friends. He's, Sean's talking about the importance of family and seeing them more. Gabby's talking about the fact that, like, do you really want to do this anymore? Are you fulfilled? And Jerry doesn't really get anything from this, but now Paul has had that realization, and we're almost to the end of the episode, and Paul has clearly set up the fact that he's probably not going to work much longer, if at all. And so then we get the next scene, and and it's Derek, and Derek thinks he's dead. And my next favorite part, besides the Harrison Ford doing the Indiana Jones thing, is Derek goes, "I think I'm dead," and and then everyone's like, "You're not dead," and Matthew's like, "You're not dead, Dad. Like, you're not dead." And Jimmy goes, "Ooh," he acts like a ghost, and Derek freaks out. He's like, "Oh my God, I'm dead!" But it was such a good moment. I love their interactions, but Derek talking to the doc, making all sorts of jokes, and he goes, "You swallowed 650 milligrams of THC," and he goes, "Yeah, I ate a whole bag of gummies," and they're just like, "Oh my God!" But they're gonna have to send him to cardiology because they're like, that could be really bad for your heart. So we're gonna check your heart, but if your heart's good, we can discharge you because I think everyone's fine. And then Derek, after the doctor leaves, goes, "Did anybody catch the guy that stole that guy's dick?" And they're like, "What are you talking about? What dude's dick?" And they're like, "The mannequin." So that was a really good moment. But again, it brings them all in the hospital again. They all, I think Paul is the only one that's not there. And I think they make that realization, but they're like, has anybody cared to kind of call Paul and tell him what's going on? But then we get another scene with Gabby, and Gabby, I think, is at a bar, and she's talking to Maya, and she's like, "Gabby, this is random. Why are you just showing up randomly?" And Gabby's like, "Well, you said you were going to be here at the bar, so I looked it up and saw that this is the only one here, and I'm hearing is very stalkerish as I'm starting to say this." But she's like, "I just want to make sure that you're okay." if you're going to have to hang solo, she's very worried. I think Maya is starting to feel very lonely and not really have anybody to go to. And I think because Gabby hasn't really felt like she's been listening as well, she's really just starting to kind of connect with Maya. And I do. I think the idea is that Maya is feeling very alone. She's got nobody to really turn to. Her friends have moved, gotten married, and they just kind of have left her. And Gabby, I think, listening to that, but I think also is befriending her. But we then get Liz talking to Brian, and they're talking about the kid, and they're talking about how Charlie and them are doing right now, and how difficult it can be and challenging it can be. And I think it's a real cool dynamic because you've got Liz and Derek who are living with the challenges of their child and what they're going through with Matthew. And I think that, you know, you got these new parents and they're having the struggles of being a new parent, obviously, right? But it ultimately comes into this like they thank Liz for helping out. And um, Liz is like, she goes, I've talked a big game as a mom, but like I'm failing as a mom. Like it's been chaos lately. And it's a really cool moment just because I think every parent, from everything that you hear, like I'm not a parent, but everything you hear from parents or parenting, you do have a lot of times where I feel like parents always admit, and there was a lot of this talk whenever I would talk to people who have kids of like, you never feel like one, your job's done as a parent. You do feel like your kids' failures are your failures. And as much as it shouldn't feel like that, obviously it's going to feel like that because you care about these people and these kids, and it was your role for so long to raise these kids. But once they're out on their own, it's hard to it's hard to take ownership of some of the stuff they do because like they're making the choices as an individual and as an independent person. And uh, yeah, like I just feel like Liz feels that she and Derek have failed her kid Matthew, and he brings her like fries, and she's like, "What are you doing? Like, what is wrong with like you just can't get anything right? You continue. I told you to do something, you don't do it. Like this is not what I meant for you to go get a job. Like, yeah, like this is not exactly what I meant by." Trying to guide you into the next path of life because Matthew just brings it right. He goes, "Oh, I thought that's what you meant. I didn't know you needed me to get a job." But ends up being a really great conversation between Brian and Liz of parenting and how your failures will always feel like failures and your successes you can celebrate as successes. But at the end of the day, parenting can be very humbling. And I think that's kind of where that conversation ends is just that, you might not get everything right and that's okay. But, parenting never really stops either. So we then have the last scene, and Jimmy goes in, and Paul is lounging in the dark in his chair in his office, and he finally admits to Jimmy that it's time, that he feels like it's time that he steps aside and doesn't continue to work. And I think it's definitely going to be like not like a cold quit, but I do think he's just going to start to not work at all. But he'll kind of transition it, I imagine. I think Jimmy probably takes it over, but uh, the practice isn't really his anymore. He doesn't really want the pressures of that. He doesn't really want to see patients. He just kind of wants to live his life. And I felt like this is the way that this season was going to go. We've gotten confirmation that Harrison was fine doing shrinking as long as possible. I do wonder how long he starts to. I don't know. Like there was an interview with Bill Lawrence earlier that he said that he'd kind of seen shrinking in Ted Lasso in these 3 season character arcs, but always had the ability to extend them. And I think shrinking is going to extend those character arcs. I don't think we're going to get a whole new cast. I do think that maybe there are some storylines and characters arcs that kind of end or change in a way, but I do feel like shrinking will continue on this path. And but I don't know what that means for I mean Harrison's up there in age. I don't know what it means for Paul as a character. I'm assuming he'll continue to star in that, but I don't know. Like Harrison's always, especially as he's gotten older, he doesn't really stick around projects too much. I think at one point actually he told Lucas over at Star Wars that he didn't want to continue playing Han Solo, and so that's why they kill him in that first uh, reboot of in the Force Awakens, is I think that he had told them he didn't really want to continue playing that role for the next 5 or 6 years, whatever it was. But again, I do think that this sets up the point where they could maybe write out Harrison's character. I don't know if Paul would move on. I'm assuming he's going to be here throughout the whole season, but I don't know what that looks like going forward, and how this show changes and how long it goes without them changing guard of characters. So I'll be interested to see. I think they're happy with where they're going. I think it was already renewed for season 4. It sounds like Harrison will be in 4, but I don't know how much. But we'll see. We'll see where this is going. We're only about, I think, halfway through the season now. I think next week's episode is halfway through the season, and then we'll see where they go from there. But yeah, Paul's ready to stop, and Jimmy doesn't fight him on it. He understands. He knows that the show's shifting, and I think it's shifting towards Jimmy. It's going to focus a lot on Gabby and what Gabby wants to do. Alice is a senior in high school, so I wonder how that changes. So I think we're headed for a lot of changes. I think Liz, Derek, and them, they'll be kind of a mainstay, but I don't know. It's a fascinating one because the show is good. It's really good. I don't know what the plans are going forward, and how this might change everything. But just talking about the last episode, I mean, it sounds like Jimmy and Gabby are going to kind of mean the mainstays. Sean maybe taking over a bit of that central character arc, but I don't know. Maybe Sean gets into this field. I have no idea. Like, he's got his food truck, so I don't know. But like, Sean's very good at this too, where he's able to talk to people, I think. But we'll get a lot more of Sean, I believe, and a lot more of Liz, is if they start to kind of use Paul's character less and less. I don't think we'll have many issues making up for that. Pretty interesting though that we got Michael J. Fox in this episode. Pretty interesting the route now that they're taking, because I mean, we will get maybe some more Paul Julie moments, which I really enjoy. I think following their love life, their marriage has been a lot of fun. So Brian and this might be a case of like they've got so many characters they're trying to build out that they kind of back burner some of them. But I mean, I think with Charlie and Brian having a kid, I think you could do even more with them, like turn more of a focus towards them. Uh, Alice doesn't really have much of a part in this episode, but I think you could really lean into her character some here. Jimmy's romantic relationship probably will take shape here. I imagine that he and Sophie end up together at some point, but yeah, it was very interesting. I don't know walking away from this episode what this all means for Paul's character going forward with the show. But it did seem like, I mean, maybe he steps back into it, but like dealing with Parkinson's, and I think that road's going to be rough, and how quickly it can take over somebody's life. I'm fascinated to see what they do with his character. So I think that's pretty much it for that episode, though. It was relatively short. It didn't really have a ton going on, but we did have some big moments. Obviously, we get the realization of Liz not being what she considers a great parent. We have Jimmy realizing that he's ready to at least start getting out there again. Gabby still trying to find fulfillment, and I think she found it somewhat. She tuned back in with Maya, and probably saved Maya's life. Like, Maya seemed to be on a path of she could hurt herself or something like that, where she just goes into some kind of depression. Like, she seems depressed, and I don't think Gabby had been listening. That's part of that too, is that she hadn't quite been tuned in to what Maya was really hinting at. But I think we finally found that, and maybe Maya's brought into the show more. I don't know. So we actually haven't seen Gabby's Derek in a while. So I don't really know. And I don't remember them breaking up. So I don't know if that was just a decision that was made that they weren't going to involve him as much in this season. But I do think we'll eventually revisit that as well, that relationship. But let me know your thoughts on this episode. I know this was relatively shorter, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was good. I thought it had really good moments. Obviously, Derek carries a lot of his episode every time he's in it. And I thought that the THC getting high on gummies was fantastic. So I really thought that was a nice touch. But going forward with the show, I mean, if I had to predict, I think Jimmy reconnects with Sophie, and that becomes more of a serious relationship. I don't know if it lasts forever, but I think that's going to be his first serious relationship outside of the death of Tia. Um, we don't really have a lot of direction for Alice in this. I mean, we've now gotten to the point where we assume she's going to Wesleyan, which is on the East Coast. Which, I mean, if she's a senior now and she goes to the East Coast, I don't really know what that means for her character going forward. I don't know if we'll get much of her unless she decides to just stay local and go to college around them. Gabby, again, I feel like she's still searching for something that she's missing, moving past the death of her best friend. Liz and Derek still trying to figure out what the hell's going on with their kids, uh, both of them. And then we got Julie and Paul and Sean. Like Sean, I feel like there's more to the whole Marisol thing. Just don't know if that's going to be a relationship that sticks, but maybe. I don't know. We'll see. But not a whole lot of answers in this one. I think we get some more. We're obviously in that mid-season, not really filling gaps, but kind of progressing it. It's not necessarily in the rising. We're not really in the rising action. We're more up to where we're having a little bit of the build up of certain characters and things that are happening with characters, and probably not in the next season, or sorry, in the next episode or two, we're going to get to see some more climactic issues happening. And I'm interested to see what those are, because we seem to, I think Jimmy's relationships are obviously going to be a sole or a central, I wouldn't say conflict, but central focus of the season is going to be him moving on. But now that Paul has really seemed to have just altogether retired in that moment, we don't really have anything like boiling. So I don't know. We'll see where it goes from there. But I'm interested to see what your guys' thoughts. Where do you think this show is headed this season? Where do you think our characters are headed down this path, and what's going to happen with them? But thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Again, you can find us over on YouTube at the Screen Society Podcast. Anywhere you get your audio podcast as well. You can find us on socials at the Screen Society Podcast. If you just search us, we've got different usernames on the different accounts. I'm going to try to link them down below, but a lot of times I forget to do that. So if you're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, you can just search the Screen Society Podcast. We should be one of the first ones, or the first one to pop up. But thanks again for listening. Thanks for watching. And we will see you next time when we review Season 3, Episode 5 of Shrinking.